Back with you. I came across a video. In fact, it's a series of videos. I think he's got 7 of them out by a guy named Tom Wadsworth, Dr. Tom Wadsworth. He's been dealing with his subject matter for over 20 years, and that subject matter is about how the early church met. This would be interesting if you're a person who just wants to know more about the history of the church. If you're a person who particularly, there's a lot of people that I run across who are confused about the early church. They're confused about where the church came from. They're confused about the Council of Nicaea, and they're confused about how books were chosen for the Bible, or what we use contemporarily. And they think they know, but they don't. And there's a lot of people who just make bull statements. They don't know what they're talking about. So it'll be interesting if you think you know what you think about the early church, and especially if you're not a serious Christian because you think that the Christianity is a silly thing. If you really learn about where Christianity comes from, I think you might be surprised. But anyway, so he's talking about what I'm going to call this the evolution of house gatherings to cathedrals. Because what Wadsworth has looked at, and I'm not going to, this one lesson or one presentation is about that he did is a little bit over an hour long. It's, well worth it, very informative, chock full of information. But I'm just going to highlight some things about it. And so the early church, as most people, we sort of know this. Oh, yes, when they first started off, obviously Jesus rose from the dead, and then people didn't go out and build a cathedral the next day. In fact, they were persecuted in many cases, in many places. So, you weren't doing that. And people were meeting in what we call the house churches. I think this is funny. I've seen people reacting to this, some ministers. And look, I'm all for having a community, and it's all good to me to go to church on Sunday and have set routines and things like that. I'm for that because we're human, and unfortunately, we humans like to do what we humans like to do. So if we want to hear rock and roll music, we have rock and roll music at church, right? If you want to listen to gospel, we'll have gospel. Your congregation that you like is going to be a particular kind of thing. If you like to drink beer for your communion, then you'll drink beer for your communion. That's whatever you want to do. I'm not saying any of it is right or wrong. I'm trying to express that humanity wants to do what it wants to do. So, if you don't like to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning to go to Sunday school, then you don't, and that is why nobody has Sunday school anymore, because nobody's getting up at 9 o'clock to go to Sunday school. Okay. Anyway, I digress. So the early church met in homes. And he looks at some archaeology and points out, how the earliest church that they know of actually apparently was a house that was modified into a church building. And probably some wealthy person gave their house to the church, when they died or whatever. And they made some modifications. But anyway, there's a few quotes I want to make here just to give you a flavor of it. So Clement of Alexandria, and this was 200 A.D. So this is before the Council of Nicaea. As you know, just before the Council of Nicaea, for a while there, the Christians had been Constantine, and he was a co-emperor, but the co-emperors, Constantine, the other emperor, had made Christianity no longer illegal as of around 320 or something like that, somewhere in that neck of the woods. So, and then they had the Council of Nicaea because Constantine wanted to get all these different Christians to have one uniform thing, and of course, Constantine also, and this is probably one of the problems that as time went forward, created some of the problems of the church. I'll call them problems because they brought in if you were a priest in a Aphrodite temple, then you got to be a priest in the church. It was a state religion then. So, so those kind of things happen, and you have people who are starting to pervert. Maybe the bishops of the early church were trying to teach them, but you can see where that would happen. People who were not raised Christian, did not really know Christianity, didn't know Christ, but they were brought into the church and held offices in the church. That's my understanding. If I'm wrong, somebody write down there and let us know if I'm wrong about that. But that's my understanding. Anyway, I digress again. So here is Clement of Alexandria in 200 AD. So this is 100 years before Nicaea. And he's saying the word, or essentially Bible, the word prohibits all sacrifice and buildings of temples, indicates the Almighty is not contained in anything. Okay, this is something that was written around 200. So that's Clement of Alexandria. And then we have Arnobius at 300 AD. This is still before the Council of Nicaea, etc. We do not rear temple for the we do not, I feel like I might have written that wrong, but I have written down, we do not rear temple for the ceremonies of worship, do not set up statues and images to any god, do not build altars. So you can see here, even as late as 300 AD, church fathers were arguing that the church is not a building. It's not a place where you get together. It's not a place where you do sacrifices. It's not a place where you have certain ritual things that you do. A church is a place where you get together and share. And so there's multiple references that I have here. We have Ignatius in about circa 105. He mentions that they come together for thanksgiving and the glory of God. They come together. They don't go to church. They don't worship. They come together for the glory of God, for thanksgiving. And then 2 Clement in 125, this is a little bit, 20 years later, he's saying that the Christians come together or gather, and they don't go to church. They don't worship. God of the Christian is not circumscribed by place. So once again, having a building is not important. You can see where, like, in the end of the 1800s and early 1900s, etc., you had when you had these what do you call it, awakenings in the United States. And people would go out and have camp meetings. They go have arbor church, under the trees, because God's not held within a building, right? Martyrdom of Polycarp says that it makes mentions that Christians teach many. This is a case where people are making claims about, because they don't like the Christians. And so they're making claims that the many do not, they teach many not to sacrifice or worship. So the argument against the Christians to the Roman government was that they weren't teaching people that they ought to be going to the temple of Aphrodite or Zeus or whatnot and making their offerings and worshiping them. Justin Martyr says that the Christians gather together on Sunday. He mentions Sunday. That's one of the few times I see that in the early writings. And they read writings of the apostles and the prophets. It doesn't say they have Mass. They're reading writings. So, and he also retorted to some of his critics that Christians are not atheists, because since the normal population of people at that time didn't see anybody going to a temple, so they must be atheists, right? And he said, no, we're not atheists. Anyway, that was about 160. Now, at the same time, Justin Martyr is mentioning that the Eucharist is a sacrifice, and this is something that Wadsworth gets into in more detail, but for you. But he talks about how the church starts talking about sacrifices early on. They're just getting together and having a meal, and Jesus. That's what the Last Supper is. He says, when y'all come together. So the early church would come together and have a meal, and so he mentions that. Irenaeus mentions it similarly, that he uses the word sacrifice, etc. And so does Cyprian. And this is through 160 to 250, through that period of time. So you can see you don't start hearing sacrifice until 150 years into the church existence. So that's several generations of people coming and going. Then ministers become priests, is one of the things that Wadsworth points out. And so, and he refers to Clement, who is his comment about 95 AD, mentions it, and that the priest, there's an office of priesthood. And Ignatius mentions in one of his writings in 105 that the Eucharist must be under the authority of the bishop or his appointee. And then Irenaeus makes a comment about the apostles are priests, and that they don't own anything. They give out their whole lives to leading the church, and so they are priests because of this. And then Tertullian in 200, and we're still not too far. This is just coming around. In the last 100 years, they've started talking about this. And then he makes a comment about even on laymen, they impose the duties of priesthood. Now, I'm going to share some thoughts about these things, because I can see, that it depends on how you interpret what you're reading. And when I say interpret, I don't mean you're coming up with something that's not there. I just mean it's really easy to misunderstand the point that these people are trying to make. And I think that as the church moved forward, especially after Nicaea, you can see where they would use the writings of the early fathers to make their points. Now, I've been in colloquies where we would sit and we would compare one church father to another on a topic, and that was a way for us to learn and think about, the church doctrine. One thing that they didn't teach me very much about these church fathers is that, a lot of them would not pass muster themselves as far as their doctrine goes. They would, their church fathers believe things that many, except for those who are basically universalists and believe that everybody's going to heaven and everything you believe is all the same. They would have no problem with the church father because he can believe whatever he wants to. But people who are more biblically oriented and look at what Jesus said and what Paul said, etc., and other writers in the Bible, they would hear what some of these church fathers say, and they'd say, "Hey, that's bull, that's wrong," and in fact that could be heretical, what some would say. Now, these were church fathers, or what are called church fathers. What they did is they wrote something down. How powerful they were. Eusebius was, I think that's his name, was like a guy who was a big supporter of Constantine, and he might have been an inside guy with Constantine, maybe. So maybe he had some power in that respect. And I'm sure other people did have actual power in that people respected them and listened to what they had to say. But just because you wrote something down doesn't mean you've made your argument. And maybe you're just making arguments on this intellectual scale, level between you and other intellectuals in Alexandria and in Corinth, etc., right, or in Antioch or wherever. But my point I'm trying to make here is just because a church father makes some comment doesn't necessarily make them right. I'm not arguing with these comments, though. Okay, I'm just letting you know you can go study your church fathers yourself, and you'll find out that they're not quite as doctrinally pure as what one might assume. And that is the problem. So the church, the corrupt churches that went forward, the corrupt aspects of the church would take whatever some of these guys say, and they'd make something of it that they might not have really meant. And that's what I'm going to point out here, in my opinion, might have happened. So, it's clear all the way up until, what was it, 250 or something? We saw 200 anyway. 200. We saw what Clement of Alexandria was saying, and as late or Anobius as late as 300. He was saying we do not rear temples for ceremony, or worship. We don't set up statues or images of any god. We do not build altars. Okay, well, our churches today don't sound like that. Some churches don't. Some denominations may not have an altar, but most of them I know of do, or the Episcopals or the Methodists or etc. Many are going to have a little altar out up there. We have altar calls. I remember growing up having altar calls, right? So that is something that the church eventually got around to doing, right? So you can see where, though, and this is happening in the church today. The church right now, as anybody who's paying attention knows, that the mainstream church is falling apart in America. It's just dissipating. And many people don't want to admit it. I personally think it's because what we've done is we decided to let everybody do their own thing. We've decided we've got to reach out in the world. We're going to have a basketball team. We're going to have an Easter egg hunt. We got to have a Christmas musical. And when I say Christmas musical, I don't mean one where you get together and read scripture and sing Christmas hymns, etc. I mean a Christmas musical about a snowman and Santa Claus coming. Okay? That's what churches do today. Your church may be one of them. But so we bring in people into the congregation, and then we're in the Western world. We're all democratic, so we got to let people vote on what they want to do, and so then you vote people. You bring people into all. Maybe you just need people to run the church because people are slowly leaving the church. So you're not finding people who are steeped in Christian faith from childhood, etc. And maybe what you're finding is, let's see, Sally just got saved last week, and we're going to bring her in, and she's insisting her husband come. So her husband comes along, and he cooks barbecue really good. So we're going to bring John in to cook the barbecue, and John, who doesn't do anything else at the church except cook barbecue, after 4 or 5 years, he's now on your council of elders, right? I'm just saying what's real. This is the reality of the church. And this, I think, is what Ignatius and Irenaeus and Tertullian are all talking about. They're saying, hey, you can't just let anybody come and do communion. They need to understand what the Eucharist is. They need to. It's a church sacrament. Now they're not calling it a sacrament up until Nicaea or so. Early on, they're not calling it a sacrament. It is a communal meal where we come together and share. And Paul makes this very clear to us, I believe, because he reprimands some of the people. Let's see, I know that in Corinthians 11:17 through 34, he gives pretty good instructions about what should happen during the Lord's Supper. And one of the things he mentions either there or elsewhere is that, don't come in and be a glutton and a drunkard. Don't come in and eat all the food so that some don't get to participate. And he doesn't say the elements. He just says he's talking about don't eat all the food. Now we interpret that as bread and wine, but I'm not quite sure that he meant bread and wine. He might have been talking about, okay, y'all are going to sit down, you're going to have a meal, and you're going to start it off with remembrance of Christ, and that's the Eucharist, and then you're going to share in a communal meal together, and you know, make sure you're not being a jerk and a slob and a pig. So that's really a critical thing, and I have my entire life. I've always been supportive of, until recently. I've always been supportive of in my particular denomination that I grew up in and participated in mostly, although I've participated in several different types of things that it would be smart for, and I won't mention them. It may offend you because it might be your denomination. But if you want to call it a denomination even. But I was raised as in the Methodist denomination, the United Methodist, and we have that hierarchy. The United Methodists are just Catholics as far as their form is. They're Catholics, like the Episcopalians, the Anglicans. That's what there are. They just don't have the Pope. They just chop off the top there, the Pope, and then the bishops are the ones that run things, and you have that hierarchy down. And I always supported the idea that, the guy who ought to know what the church is all about should be the elder, which is the minister in the United Methodist Church, the elder. As I've grown in wisdom and age, it's quite clear that there's many of these elders who are pretty heretical. And I almost was an elder myself, and I was pretty heretical. But my decision was, this guy shouldn't be going into a church and perverting the church. That was part of the reason I didn't become an elder. There was other reasons as well, but that was a primary reason. So, but there's other people who I was in theology school with who they went right into the ministry. And anyway, I know very much about the institutional church, and it's not a pretty thing. But today, and it might not have been very pretty in the first 200 years, 200 or 300 years, but I can see the argument that's being made here that we can't just let somebody who's was worshiping Aphrodite 3 years ago, and they've just and their wife wife got saved, and she knows who Christ is. And the other guy, I sort of know him, but I'm going to go along with my wife. And so he's now in it, but he's a good guy. Everybody likes him. He tells good jokes, and he knows how to behave, reverently, etc. But who has he proven himself to, as far as his faith goes? And so I can see where they would be making these arguments that, look, yes, we're all priests, but some of us are priests who are worthy of the word, and other of us are priests in training, right? We're all growing in Christ as long as we're not walking away from him. If you're walking toward Christ, you should be growing in Christ. So have you grown in Christ or not? And so I can see where that might be the assumption or the arguments that these guys are making. And then after the Council on Nicaea, after Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the empire, then, hey, let's go find something that justifies why we're building temples, because that's one thing Constantine started doing. Well, you can see where Constantine, who was really, if I remember correctly, never really, he supported Christianity, but he didn't exactly jump in with both feet, right? But he did support it, and So he started building these temples. Why would you do that? Because, well, if it's the official religion, these other religions have temples. Well, Christianity ought to have temples too. That's not a reason to do it. That is a secular reason, and that's the way the church is run today. What is the guy down the street doing at McDonald's? And let's do what McDonald's is doing, right? It's the same thing. What? It's just the same thing. It's always been here. But if we look at what the early church was, it was people getting together and teaching, encouraging each other, and having a community, sharing how Christ is working in their lives. You know, edifying each other, encouraging each other, holding each other responsible, accountable. Don't do a lot of that these days. Anyway, go and listen to this guy. It's worth it. And if you may, as I said, he has like 6 other videos related to the early church. And since he goes into it in such detail and in depth with all these resources and things, it may open your eyes about what you might think you should be doing, regardless to what your church is doing. What should you do to grow closer? If you disagree with what I'm saying, please feel free to make a comment. Feel free to like. Feel free to subscribe. I hit a whole variety of things. This is, I can talk about faith-related stuff. I can talk about my professional stuff because I'm a landscape architect. I love history. I love current events. And so I talk a little bit about all of that. But if you like faith-oriented stuff, yeah, certainly let me know that this is something you're into, and maybe I'll do more of this. So far, I've only been doing this now for, less than a month. I haven't had a lot of responses, and maybe I'm just a sad person sitting here talking to myself. I hope not. Have a good day.